محدثات الأمور, the chapter regarding the prohibition of heresies and innovative matters in religion. And we've reached the hadith عن جابر بن عبد الله رضي الله عنهما قال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا خطب احمرت عيناه وعلى صوته واشتد غضبه حتى كأنه منذر جيش يقول صبحكم ومساكم, ويقول بعثت أنا والساعة كهاتين, ويقرن بين إصبعيه السبابة والوسطى, ويقول أما بعد فإن خير الحديث كتاب الله, وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم, وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل بدعة ضلالة. ثم يقول أنا أولى بكل مؤمن من نفسه من ترك بالا فلأهله, ومن ترك دينا أو ضياعا فإلي وعلي. رواه مسلم رضي الله رحمه الله تعالى. طيب, so in this hadith, Jabir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu, he says what means when Allah's messenger delivered a sermon, his eyes reddened, his voice elevated, and his anger intensified, as if he was warning of the approach of an opposing army coming to wage war. So just imagine a person, how frantic they would be, how excited they would be, how exuberant they would be, how demonstrative they would be if what? On the other side of this hill was what? An army coming to what? Rape, rob, and pillage. How would you be? That's how the Prophet ﷺ was on the minbar. He wasn't monotone. He wasn't, well, you know, brothers, Islam is important. Islam is love. That wasn't his style at all. As he said, كَأَنَّهُ مُنذِرْ جَيْشٍ, as if he was warning of an impending army on the other side of a hill coming to wage war, rape, rob, and pillage. He said he would say, the enemy is conducting a morning raid. The enemy is conducting a night raid. He would also say, my appointment and the last hour are like these two. He would join his forefinger and his middle finger. And he would further say, the best speech ever spoken is the book of Allah, and the finest guidance is the guidance of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The worst of affairs are newly invented matters in religion, and every innovation without exception is misguidance. He would further say, I have more rights over a Muslim than his own self. He who died and left property and assets, that is for his family. And he who dies in debt or leaves children behind with no one to care for them, the responsibility of paying his debt and bringing up his children lies upon me. So we'll look at some of the phrases in the hadith and expand on those. We won't go into too great of a detail. It's a beautiful hadith, and maybe it'll be the subject of a khutbah, inshallah ta'ala. But for right now, we'll just talk about a few of the lines from the hadith. So the first one, obviously, ihmarrat عيناه وعلى صوته واشتد غضبه. His eyes reddened, his voice elevated, his anger intensified, as if he was warning of the approach of an opposing army coming to wage war. So first of all, we need to understand something about the Messenger of Allah. This was not his normal demeanor. This is not how he was in day-to-day life, right? He wouldn't meet a person and say, Salaam alaikum, right? He wouldn't meet a person and behave like that. He was soft, he was demure, he was calm, he was cool, he was collected. He was someone who his interactions with people were warm and welcoming, right? He did this only while sermonizing. Because of what? The effect. The effect is more potent on the listener. And he did this for what? For a good reason. So basically, as the scholars of Islam say, لِكُلِّ مَقَامٍ مَقَالٍ. For every situation, there is a style or a statement. There's a way to conduct yourself in each given situation. When he got on the minbar, he was a different person. He assumed a different persona. Right? Why? Not for his own sake, but for the sake of what? Of the listeners, for the sake of the audience. The sermon, basically what the Prophet is teaching us effectively through his own behavior in this maqam, as our example, as our role model. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. You have the message of the most excellent role model. Is that the sermon should stir the hearts and it should move people and should touch them. This is what the sermon should do. It should not be something that puts people to sleep. Do people fall asleep? Yeah. But they shouldn't fall asleep because of the style of the khatib. They should fall asleep despite the style of the khatib. You understand what I'm saying? You see that? The khatib shouldn't put people to sleep. You see that? Oh, I love to go to the khutbah, man. I get the best sleep of my life. I get the best nap I've had in my life when I go to the khutbah. His voice is so calming and soothing. No, it shouldn't be. It should be something that keeps you awake, keeps you engaged. You can't stop. You want your thoughts to go elsewhere, but they can't. They won't go elsewhere because he's in your face. And this wasn't how the Prophet normally was, but he assumed this persona, which means what? This is how the khutbah should be delivered. And the people who say, oh, why is he shouting? Why is he raising his voice? He should just speak in a monotone. Why is he being so demonstrative? Right? Why does he seem so angry? He's wrong for doing that. They're wrong. Because this is how the Prophet ﷺ gave what? Gave the khutbah. And this teaches us too that the khutbah shouldn't just touch you by the subject matter. It shouldn't just be the subject. You see them sometimes a person will pick a subject and it's touching. The person talks about death. Right? Just talks about Jannah. And you think about the topic and you're like, man, yes. It's something when you really reflect on it. It's touching, it's moving, it stirs the emotions. But it shouldn't just be the subject. It should also be what? It should be the manner in which it's delivered. Both of those things should what? Should be coupled together. Y'all see that? That makes sense? But like he says in the hadith, he said that the Prophet said, بُعِثْتُ أَنَا وَالسَّاعَةَ كَهَاتَيْنِ. He says, my appointment in the last hour like these two, and he would join his forefinger and the middle finger to what? Together. So basically what this teaches, brothers and sisters, that the hour is closer than we realize, and the appointment of Allah's messenger is one of the great portents of the coming of the hour. Y'all see that? It's one of the great portents. There's different signs. There's, for example, alamat al-sa'a al-kubra, right? The big signs. And then alamat al-sa'a al-sughra. The Prophet's coming is from what? From alamat al-sughra, right? The minor signs of the what? Of the coming of the hour. Al-kubra are like, for example, the earthquakes, one after the other, right? A huge blaze that erupts in different parts of the country and drives people toward one place, right? These types of things are what? The big sign. But knowing the fact that the sa'a is what? It's close. He said what? Kahatain, like this, one after the other. It should do what? It should incite us to prepare for it. Prepare for it with knowledge, knowing our deen. Knowing our deen and believing in our deen, the way we're supposed to believe in it, and practicing our deen the way we're supposed to practice it, and doing the good deeds that will make us entitled to Allah's rahmah. This is what we should busy ourselves with, knowing that what? That what? It's close. Then by that he says, وَخَيْرُ الْحَدِيثِ كِتَابُ اللَّهِ. He says, and the best speech ever spoken is the book of Allah. So the first thing we learn right from out the gate is that the Quran is not created. It is the literal speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah spoke these words. The Prophet called it what? Hadith. You see that? He called it hadith. It is the speech of Allah. It is not created. He didn't say khayru khalqillah. He didn't say the best creation of Allah. He said khayrul hadith. The best speech. Allah spoke these words. They are the literal words of Allah. It is also the best speech. No words of any created being could ever be superior to the speech of who? Of Allah, to the Quran. Therefore, Muslims should never put the speech of any ordinary human being or speech attributed to Allah that has been altered or corrupted by human beings. They should never put that on par with the Quran, let alone what? Above it, right? You'll hear somebody say, for example, Allah said, and then somebody would say, yeah, but, the Constitution, brother. Y'all see that? Muslims should not be the people who say that, but some Muslims, they do. Y'all see that? I remember one time, I'm gonna give you this example, this anecdote. I was working with some students at the MSA in Charlottesville, and we sat down and talked about, what the semester would look like, what type of programs we would give them, what type of service we would provide between counseling and maybe a bi-weekly program or bi-monthly program or whatever like that. So we're talking about these things. And they're kind of like telling me about the lay of the land and how they like to operate. And so they were like, okay, one of the things that we have as a policy is that we don't criticize and we don't correct anyone's practice of the deen. So when we get together, we have our gatherings, whether they're social gatherings or gatherings for religious programming, right? People just can come as they are, right? And so, for example, a Muslim college student might come, and it's a female, and she doesn't come with any hijab. She wears makeup. She wears perfume, right? She wears clothes that looks like they're painted on, right? And she sits right next to what? Someone. Maybe she has a boyfriend. She brings her boyfriend with her so he can, hear about Islam. Whatever it is, right? We do those things, right? And if somebody criticizes them in the chat or criticizes them in the gathering, we make that person leave. So if a person said, hey, really, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't come like that, or you shouldn't bring your boyfriend, or you and your boyfriend shouldn't sit together and hold hands, or whatever like that. Somebody were to say that, they would criticize the person who criticized that, and they would actually ask them to leave. So they would allow this person to do something that violates the law of Allah. You see that? And nobody's saying, just al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy al-munkar. Just commanding good and forbidding evil, and just saying, hey, you really shouldn't do that, and then leaving them alone after that. Let them decide what to do with that information. No, you can't even do that. You can't speak out. So I asked him, I said, okay, so I said, what if you guys did a bonfire and somebody came with marijuana? And they took the cigarette and put it in the bonfire to light it, and they just started smoking it. And then they were like, hey, you want to hit? You want to hit? They're like, oh, no. Oh, we wouldn't allow that. We wouldn't allow that. I said, why not? They said, because the university. That's against the university policy. I said, oh. I said, so if it goes against the law of Allah, it's okay. I know what's happening. If it goes against the law of the university, that's something else. And they all lowered their heads. And you see how sometimes we can get so far away from deen that we do and say things that they're totally out of phase with what our deen is. You see, to the point that statement made them realize, man, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Nobody's speech should be above the speech of who? The speech of Allah. What do you have to do? He said, وَخَيْرُ الْهَدِي هَدِي مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. He said, and the finest guidance is the guidance of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what he meant by the guidance of Muhammad is what? As-sunnah wal hadith. As-sunnah wal hadith. Right? And if you notice, if you look in the Quran, if you look in the Sunnah, you find that the Quran and Sunnah are repeatedly mentioned together. They are mentioned together, and they are always what? Coupled. They belong together. And basically the meaning is that the Sunnah completes what? The Quran. There is no Quran without Sunnah. That's why they're always mentioned together, and they should not be separated. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Nahl, verse 44, He says, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِلَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. He says, we revealed the reminder to you, O Muhammad. The reminder is what? Okay, wait. We revealed the reminder to you, O Muhammad, so that you could clarify to people that which had been sent down to them, and so that they would reflect. Are they two things or one thing? Something was sent down to them. That's what? The Quran. Then we gave you what? A dhikr. We gave you something else to clarify the meaning of what? The Quran. What is that dhikr? It's the Sunnah. It's the Hadith. Y'all see that? They complete each other. They need each other. One can't stand alone, and so there should be nothing called Quraniyun. There should be nothing called Muslims who what? Who only believe in the Quran and don't believe in the Hadith. You see that? How do you pray? Right? وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ the Sunnah لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِلَ إِلَيْهِمْ Salat. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. What does that mean, Ya Rasulullah? Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. Pray as you've seen me pray. You'll never know how to pray. Just from what? Just from reading the Quran. Y'all see that? But ثم بعد ذلك, it also teaches us that no one is a better example or role model than the Prophet Muhammad. And there's no manner of believing or conduct which is superior to the guidance he brought. Which means it's very important for Muslims to hold their head high. And when they do things that the Prophet taught them, to do them with pride. Even if they're ridiculed or criticized by what? By non-Muslims. For example, a Muslim grows a beard and non-Muslims criticize him. Oh, you look disheveled. You don't look neat. You don't look clean cut. You'd look so much better if you shaved, right? A Muslim doesn't listen to that. He's not moved by that. Because why? Because the Prophet not only grew a beard, but he said, "Hafu shawarib wa ufu al-liha." He said, trim your mustaches and let your beards grow. This was his guidance. And so his guidance is enough for me. I don't care what other people say about it. Another example, famously, I think it was Salman al-Farisi. One of the mushrikun caught him in Mecca and said to him, man, you do everything your prophet said, and your prophet tells you how to do everything. You don't have any autonomy in your deen, even how to, adab qada al-hajj, even how you go to the bathroom. And Salman al-Farisi wasn't ashamed of that. He didn't feel belittled by that. He was proud of that. He pumped his chest. He said, yeah. He taught us that we should not clean ourselves with less than 3 stones. And he taught us that we shouldn't face the Qibla when we do number 1 or do number 2. And he taught us this. He told him all the etiquettes. Proudly. He wasn't ashamed of that. Because what? The best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad. There's nothing better than that. And look at the benefits of that. Look at the benefits of that. The cleanliness, the hygiene, the prevention of the spread of disease. How much disease is spread through what? Through fecal matter. You see what I'm saying? But when people are clean and their hands are clean and free of fecal matter, less disease is what? Spread. So there's benefits for the individual, benefits for the society. We'll close with this. Make a few comments on this last statement where he said, وَشَرُّ الْأُمُورِ مُحْدَثَاتُهَا وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ. He said, the worst of affairs are newly invented matters in religion, and every innovation without exception is misguidance. So basically what the Prophet is teaching us, or yushiru ilay, he's alluding to the fact that sins are of two types, 2 categories. The first category is al-ma'asi ash-shahwaniyah. Second category is al-ma'asi ash-shubuhatiyah. Al-ma'asi ash-shahwaniyah, the sins of desires. Person what? Person commits a zina, fornicates or commits adultery. Person steals. Person lies and cheats and defrauds. Right? These are all what we call the sins of desires. Then you have what? Al-ma'asi ash-shubuhatiyah. The sins of what? The sins of doubts and misconceptions. Like a shirk, like in bid'ah, innovations and heresies. And the Prophet is basically telling us out of these 2 categories, which one is worse? Which one is worse? Ahsant. وَشَرُّ الْأُمُورِ مُحْدَثَاتُهَا. And the worst of the 2 types of sins are the sins of what? Ash-shubuhat. The sins of what? Of doubts and misconceptions in religion. وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ. And every innovation, every deviation from the path that Allah brought and the path of Muhammad is what? Is misguidance. It's important for us as Muslims to internalize this, because a lot of times what happens is we get more outraged by the sins of desires than we do by the sins of shubuhat, doubts and misconceptions. We haven't internalized that. So if somebody drinks alcohol, we consider that worse than a person who wears a talisman and believes the talisman will protect him. Y'all see that? We think we go to people's houses and they have these like talismans all over the place, and they believe they'll protect them, and they do like a lot of like little different things. Their child's about to go outside, and they have a special type of water that they sprinkle on them, or they have this like this bundle of sage that they burn, and they do like that to them. And people are like, they're just trying to protect their kids. They believe in God. They pray, right? Come on, that's not a big deal. What? There's things worse than that. There are people who drink alcohol. And this is what we do as Muslims. We're not outraged by al-bid'ah, right? People celebrate Mawlid Nabi. We're like, what? Come on, they're getting together, remember Rasulullah, and, praying and, worshiping Allah. They're doing good things. They're not in the bar. They're not in the disco. Y'all see that? We think that this is less than this, but that's not what the Prophet said. He said the worst is what? Al-ma'asi shubuhatiyah. There were sins of what? The sins of misconceptions and doubts, right? And there's a famous. I want to say it's Abdul Rahman ibn Nasr al-Sa'di, but it might have been another imam. Al-Muhim, there was an imam who was teaching his students, and he was teaching them a lot about Tawheed, teaching them a lot about Sunnah. He was teaching them about that, and they said, "Okay, man, when we gonna learn something else? When we gonna learn something else?" So he wanted to test him. So he said, so one day he came, and he seemed like frazzled. He said, "Oh, we have to go. There's a situation in one of the suburbs. We have to go and deal with it. We have to go and deal with it. There's a man who fell in love with his father's ex-wife, and he married her. We have to deal with that. We have to do something about that." And the students were upset. "What? I can't believe that. Yeah, we have to do something about it." So then the imam stepped out. He stepped back in, and he said, okay, you guys can calm down. Sit down. We're going to do our dars, because it wasn't as big as I thought it was. He said, what it actually was, the information I got was not accurate. What actually happened was that there was a man in the neighboring village, who slaughtered a chicken to an idol. That's all it was. And they were like, "Oh, okay." And they all sat down. And he said, this is why we study Tawheed. This is why y'all not ready to move on to something else. You see that? Because why? What's worse? A shirk. Y'all see that? But a lot of Muslims do what? The mizan for them is what? It's upside down. The Prophet is teaching us in hadith that no heresy, no innovation or heresy in religion is good. And Ibn Umar, he said famously, "Kullu bid'atin dalala wa in ra'aha an-nas hasana." Right? He said every sin is misguidance, even if some people consider it good. Right? Sometimes, this is a good innovation. No, every innovation is misguidance. And then think about the fact that the Prophet ﷺ, he knew what he was saying. He knew what the words meant. And every time he gave an address, every time, when he got a member or he just wanted to talk to his companions about any subject, he would always begin with what? With these words. As if to what? To emphasize and stress and leave no doubt that this statement I'm making is absolute without any exceptions. Every innovation without exception is what? Is balada. And they internalize that to the point that one of the umara, he was on the minbar, and when he went to give dua at the end of the khutbah, he did this. And one of the companions said, "Cursed be what? Be these two hands." I never saw the Prophet, when he gave dua at the end of khutbah, make dua except by doing what? Raising the sababa. He didn't make dua like this. You would think, well, that's not a big deal, because outside of the khutbah, we're encouraged to raise our hands in dua. But just because the Prophet had drilled it into them so emphatically that every deviation from the sunnah is misguidance, even this, what we would consider to be a small deviation, even that, the companions would do what? Would rail against it. To the point that he prayed against him. Prayed against him for just doing what? For cupping his hands. Y'all see that? So I say all this to say is that the effect on them from the Prophet saying that, the way that they internalized that was every innovation without what? Exception, even if we consider it small, insignificant. It's a big deal. We don't deviate from what we were taught. We do what we were taught, right? Like, last but not least, we also learned something which is very, very important. That's the correct wording of this phrase and how it should be said in the khutbah. So basically, you'll hear quite often when people give the khutbah, they'll say, وَشَرُّ الْأُمُورِ مُحْدَثَاتُهَا وَإِنَّ كُلَّ بِدْعَةٍ they'll say أحسنت وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة. أحسن جزاك الله خير. So they'll add that other phrase, and it's become so common and so muntashir that when somebody says what the Prophet said in the hadith, وَشَرُّ الْأُمُورِ مُحْدَثَاتُهَا وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ, somebody will come up to him after the khutbah. Trust me, I know. People will come up to him after the khutbah and say, hey, you said it wrong. You said it wrong. You didn't say وَكُلُّ مُحْدَثَةٍ بِدْعَةٍ. I say, because that's not in the hadith. It's not in the hadith that the Prophet said, according to Jabir radiallahu anhu. And so the way that we should say it is وَشَرُّ الْأُمُورِ مُحْدَثَاتُهَا وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ. Best, because that's what the Prophet said. وَخَيْرُ الْهَدِي هَدِي Muhammad. And the best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad. We want to do it his way. And with that, brothers and sister, we will bring this morning's remarks to a close. And we ask our brothers and sisters online to please subscribe to the channel. And we ask you also to sign up for notifications. Hit that little bell. And that way, every time we go live, you will be with us, inshallah ta'ala. If you can't be with us in the masjid, you'll be with us online. And we'll be a community in the masjid and a community on the airwaves. May Allah bless you all. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as always make us from those who listen to the talk and follow the best of it. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وجزاكم الله خير. Huh? Oh, did you have a question to me? Just quickly end this. It's still recording. It's still recording.